Ed, how are you, mate? Welcome to the show, buds.
Thank you very much for having me on, Connor. How you doing?
I'm very well, mate. Very well. So, let's dive straight into this. I try and leave the small talk for about 10 minutes into the podcast so people who are listening can get a really good idea of what we're doing. So, you have a podcast called A Need to Read. You break apart books and tell everybody ultimately why reading is not this boring thing that everybody thinks it is and why it should be cooler and more acceptable in modern day society. So, why should everyone read?
I just think it's about broadening your mind, and there's a lot.
Good response off the bat.
And it wasn't even prepared for. So people nowadays spend so much time in school being told that they have to learn. By the time you leave school, I was like, I don't want anything to do with learning. I was like, and it's so backwards, because advancing yourself in the ways of sort of learning, reading, stuff like that, it just gets put on a back burner when you're done with school, because you've been told to do it for so long, and then you get this freedom of like, oh, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to read any books. I don't need to educate myself any further. And for years and years and years, I just went on the autopilot with life. I think it's quite a common sort of theme. And I started reading. I got into Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck on audiobook.
Oh, it's the same one that I got into. I used to get into reading. I read it. I didn't read it on audiobook. I'm like full team audiobook now. I'm not a great reader, not because I can't read, but just because I'll read and I'll start thinking about something else because it'll trigger something. So audiobooks are way better for me. But yes, a lot of Not Giving a Fuck was the intro book for me. But sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So the question was why everyone should read, right?
Yeah.
Broadening horizons. I think for me, it's about perspective as well. And I think we're quite sheltered nowadays. Although we get the internet and we get access to all these other people's opinions, they're not necessarily the right people's opinions that we have access to.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at it. I think I did an interview on someone else's podcast, good friend of mine's, and he asked me, like, he said one thing about me. He was like, one thing that I've got a lot of admiration for you is that you're constantly trying to further yourself. And I said something similar on his, and I said that it's a little bit of a weird one, isn't it? When you're at school, everybody tells you to learn, like you said, and it's the last thing that you want to do. And then now, once you're out of school and you're in the big wide world, and you're like, fucking hell, I don't have a fucking clue what I'm doing now. Like, how do I kind of further myself? And then you kind of fall back to what you were on before, which is reading. And like you said, there's so much information out there where it's just a lot of rubbish. And I'm, as you know, like, I'm from the fitness world, and one of the biggest battles that we have from a professional to a consumer point of view is trying to help them dissect through the rubbish. And but that is definitely broad across all different sectors and all different walks of life, where there's so many people out there. Just because we've got all these mediums to express ourselves doesn't mean that everybody who's expressing themselves has a clue what they're talking about. And it just means that a lot of the information we receive now is rubbish. And I find that, for me especially, reading is one of those ways where I can cut through the noise a little bit, and like you said, broaden my perspective. So we'll circle back to that in a little bit. Just give everyone the 101 on you, and kind of, I know you've got your podcast and kind of how that came to be in itself, because that's like a cool little story as it is.
Yeah, so I started reading properly a couple of years ago, and then the start of this year, I was really plowing through, and I'd set a goal of like 26 books in the year. I thought one every 2 weeks, it's manageable. I can just pick up a book for 10, 20 minutes a day, and I'll be able to tick that off quite easily. So did that, got to about March time, and I ticked off about 20 books, and I was like, okay, well, I'm actually going to smash a New Year's resolution for once. And I was like, this is unheard of. Went to Bali on holiday, and I saw a couple of people there that had started podcasts. Like Darren had started his podcast, and he was absolutely loving it. And I was like, do you know what? Like, I can see it really lights a fire in people. And I was like, and I love chatting about books. A lot of the friends that I've made sort of over the last year or so, I've either seen them like reading a book or something like that, and I'm like, yeah, do you know what? My guy,
books.
I like what you're reading. You can link over that.
Yeah,
it's a deeper conversation than like, oh, you watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians, do you? That's nice. Who's your favourite? Like, it's, you get to know someone a lot more when you understand and ask them about like what their opinion is on a particular book.
Yeah.
Or what they got from a book. And I feel like you get to know people on a deeper level through doing stuff like that. Anyway, went to Bali, was going to go back to Australia where I was living in Sydney. Australia shut their borders to any non-resident, and I was only on a working holiday visa, so I was essentially locked out. Had to fly back to the UK, and after a couple of days of like moping about, I was like, right, you know what to do in this kind of scenario. You've read a lot about this. It's like, let's just make the most of it. Like, life give you lemons, as it were, or like obstacles the way. Ryan Holiday, and that's a book.
Yeah.
You want to talk about? I was like, right, had the idea. Next day, woke up, thought about the idea, and I was like, right, well, if it's coming twice, I'm just doing that. So I ordered the microphone and recorded the podcast like 4 days later. The first time I tried to record it, I just couldn't get anything right. didn't know what to talk about. It was just waffle for about 4 hours, and like me and my laptop were very close to throwing hands at each other, and I think I would have won that. So I got the first episode out there, and it was actually really well received.
That's good.
I think it usually is when you start something new, because you have a lot of people that you know that are just being polite by listening, which is great. So the listen, being polite, got loads of nice messages. I was like, well, let's just see what I can make of this. So I just kept chucking the content out there, and it's grown quite nicely. Considering like the amount of time that I've been doing it, managed to have some like pretty handy guests on, and it also holds me accountable with my reading. Like, I'm reading way more than I ever have, and hopefully it'll just keep going like that.
Have you found that, like, because now you're doing the podcast, you find yourself, obviously reading is one of those things where it's, you kind of want it to be a bit of a natural process. Like I was listening to you on when you did an interview with Sinead, someone that we're both familiar with, and you were saying that, I think you said, like, I'm trying to get through 2 books a month, or 2 books or 2 books a week, something like that. And I was like, oof, like, if that was me and I was trying to force myself reading those books, like, I just probably wouldn't absorb anything. So for me, it's more of like a natural process that I just try and do here and there when I have the spare time. Like, do you find that it hasn't killed that joy yet that you have from reading?
No, it hasn't. But if I'm halfway through a bad book, I'd usually just chuck it. Whereas now I have the episode of that book sitting on my shoulder saying, finish me. Like, and I kind of have to. Whereas like I just read Deep Work, and it took me about 4 weeks to read, and it doesn't ever take me that long usually. But I knew I had the looming sort of need to get an episode out about there, because as much as I thought it was a pretty average book, because I'm quite used to the ideas from other books that I've read, I know it'll be useful for others. And I think I feel like I now kind of have almost like a responsibility to finish the book and to tell people about it. But yeah, definitely it took the enjoyment out of reading for a couple of weeks on the podcast, and I was then like, hold on, just step back, Ed, because like I'm doing this for me. It's not that I'm doing this because I want to be the Mahatma Gandhi of reading. Like, I don't want to make it like I want everyone to read, but it's obviously it's not my responsibility. Yeah, my responsibility is to myself, is to keep going with the creative outlet, read as much as I can, because I do actually enjoy it. And I think starting to read like different types of books, like novels, memoirs from people, I am enjoying it a lot more now. So I'd say, although there was a slight dip in my enjoyment, coming out the other side, I now enjoy reading now more than ever.
That's good. I think there's a massive, like, when people read, like, the biggest thing for me whenever I don't read nowhere near as you, I don't read nowhere near as like Siobhan, who we just spoke about, who we both know. But what I find for me is that when I read something, I'm pretty good at implementing it. And like, for you, it's quite good because you read, and I'm sure you read a paragraph and you read this and you read that, and you're like, okay, cool, like, oh, that's something I can definitely talk about, and you can make a little bit of a mental note of that, and then you can start to implement it and bring some value to some people. Whereas when I see some people who they read so much, and it's like I'm making a point of reading so much, I'm like, are you gonna implement that? Or like, it's all very, like, for me, it's all I want. Like you said, I really want to broaden my horizons, but I also want to use what I learn as such. What's the next steps for Need to Read? And it's the last, we'll touch on it a little bit, and then we'll go more into books and reading and education. But like, where do you want to take it? What's the plan?
So I'm about to level it up. I think I'm ready to sort of hit that next stage with it, and just basically make the content a little bit more consumable, and diversify it a bit as well. So I've just got a load of kit, so I can start like a proper YouTube and not put my episodes on YouTube, but just make it more of like educational place where I can just chat shit about certain types of books that I feel will be helpful for certain people and just break down the complicated stuff for people in a way that's just understandable. Because I feel the main thing about me is like, I haven't got a degree, I haven't read all my life, and this is new to me, and I feel there's a lot of people in the same position as me.
Yeah, I that's a great like point in there. Whereas I listen to a lot of podcasts as well. Like I'm not full team books. Like I like to expose myself to loads of different mediums so that I can kind of get a little bit more educated in different things. And I like to hear conversations and I like to hear really passive conversations as well. Like this is why why we do the podcast. So, and that's when you get a cool thing. Like I listened to a podcast with James Clear, who did Atomic Habits, which is a phenomenal book. And I probably got just as much out of that podcast from James Clear in that interview, just as much as I did from his whole book in the audio version. So it's like good. Actually, like when you've got someone like you who's going to fully break that down. For some people, reading may not seem that attractive, but then you got you who breaks down the golden nuggets from the book, so then gives it to another way. You can still kind of really help people and really bring value to them through the books.
Yeah. That's how I used to pick my books. Sorry, I was going to say that's how I used to pick my books, was from podcasts. Like whoever was on Joe Rogan talking about their book, I'd listen to maybe 2.5 hours of their conversation. Either buying into the person who wrote the book, because I'm like, right, well, I like their brain, I want to get into it a bit more, or I'm like, I actually feel like I know enough about the book to not bother reading it.
Yeah, so like we just spoke about how people are pretty terrible at school when they're learning, and like both of me and you just said that, like you said you weren't really that interested. I was solidly average at school.
Yeah, and I was very naughty.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was naughty. I was just bad at learning. Like everyone was into going study, need to revise. I was like, not a hope and prayer. Where now I will put massive priority and emphasis on reading a book and doing some learning. So, like, what for you? Where did that shift come from? And why do you think that people are so bad at learning at school versus not being so bad at it now and exposing themselves to books and podcasts and so on?
I think there's a serious misrepresentation in the world, in talking about films, where it's only the nerds or the dorks that read.
Yeah.
Like you see it all the time in films. You got the nice, like, sweet little kid who's walking around with all his books in the corridor, and then you get the big jock and he just smashes the books out of his hands and just gets bullied. And I feel like wanting to learn, particularly in the school that I went to, it wasn't a cool thing. I didn't go to a grammar school or anything like that where there was like a high emphasis on learning. It was kind of like, you're in here to wait until 3:30 and then you can go home.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't in that set where there was the kids that were passionate about learning. I was in the set where you used to watch a film as opposed to read the book. Like we just didn't want to behave. And I think the problem is about how it's sort of represented. And when you're told to do something, you're not going to do it. Like you must know with like coaching and stuff like that, you got to make people think it's their own idea.
Yeah.
And there's not enough emphasis on that in school, I don't think. I don't have a solution for that, but I think
yeah. Do you know what it is? I think the education system is probably a little bit outdated now, and I think like the purpose of the book is no longer probably needed within the education system. It might have still been when we were at school, because we were of that generation where like phones and kind of computers were really kind of coming a thing when we were at school. Whereas now, as I'm older, and what I'm exposed to as an adult and the environments and the sandboxes that I put myself in, it provides me with a competitive advantage, I find. And like the amount of times I've recited something that I've read in a book, or an experience has happened with like a client or in a business environment or in like a communication environment, and like something I've learned has allowed me to process that little situation a little bit differently. And I'll be regurgitating all this information and putting like, 1 + 1 = 2 together. And like, I didn't know that information before and I didn't learn it in the book, but those two things combined have allowed me to get a bit more of a new perspective.
Yeah.
Like I think it comes back to that one. I think it's a competitive advantage. I think, like you said, it broadens your horizons, it broadens your perspective, it allows you to see things in a little bit of a different light. And like it's good now because you've got people like Siobhan and you've got people like James Smith, and you've got people who are very successful, who are actively talking about why books are so handy and helpful to them. And then we look in the world now, and there's a massive emphasis on entrepreneurship, where like everybody's like, they want to be that person, and they want to be the person who is successful with all the massive, like, by what their definition of successful is, be it an entrepreneur who's got a lot of money, be it someone who's got a lot of Instagram followers. But you find the people who are really successful at core, who have all the different pieces of the pie of their life like in check, they will probably read or at least educate themselves on some level. And I think that's what was the big thing for me, is that I started to notice that. Have you ever watched the Bill Gates documentary?
I've seen bit parts of it, but I know he has. Are you going to talk about his reading weeks that he does?
Yeah. So like one of the big things and like if anyone's listening to this, he's like full anti-Bill Gates, who think he's going to take over the world and implant us with chips. You probably want to stop listening now. But
yeah,
he,
I mean, let him come if he is. Like, whatever.
But he like you just said, he has like a full week of reading, and like it wasn't just, all right, I'm going to do self-development week. It was like, I have this problem to solve. Like he buys like 20-30 books that are related to that problem, goes and sits in a cabin somewhere and reads and educates himself. So if Bill Gates, probably the person who has most impacted modern society on like the greatest level, you know, him and Steve Jobs are going to be up there together. If he does it, then why should Fred from Basingstoke, who thinks he's got it all sorted out and is too educated to read, why should he not be reading? Do you know what I mean? So it's a bit of a funny one.
Fred from Basingstoke sounds like Ed from Bournemouth, if I'm honest. A couple of years ago. I think on that point of Bill Gates, the one thing I always find with people like that, when people take the piss or mug off Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs or whatever, firstly I'm like, right, well, why don't you go and invent Microsoft and see how much of a good person you are? Because if you look what Bill Gates actually does for the world, Jesus, it's incredible. Yeah. And I think you can't really take that away from him. The whole having a reading week and like stillness and stuff like that, if you look at Ryan Holiday's Stillness is the Key, he talks quite a lot about that Bill Gates has those reading weeks. Abraham Lincoln used to make sure he had his walks, and just take time out of things, because the more you're caught up in the rat race, the more things demand your attention, especially nowadays. Whereas if you can just take yourself out of the situation, read about it, pick your problem, and let that problem pick your book. Yeah. So like whatever the thing is that's not quite right in your life. Like last week or 2 weeks ago, I was feeling really, really just a bit depressed, a bit sad, and I didn't feel like I had that. I didn't feel like I had my mojo. Yeah. So I was like, right, what book have I got here that I can use? So I read Paul Mort's book, Fucking Unstoppable, and I was like, I usually don't like books that tell me that I need to kick up the arse. But I knew I needed it. So what was the book like? Was it good? It's really, really good. Granted, like, he's not a professional author, and it's not his profession, but he's got actionable steps in a book that can be read by anyone, readers and non-readers alike. Like, it's really simple, and it's an interesting book, and it is raw and it's honest, and that's what I quite like. And it's very short as well. It's like 100 pages. Did you audio it or did you read it? I read it. Did you? See, I think if I was going to have a book by Paul Mort, I'd fully want to have him in my ear, giving me the kick up the arse I need. You're the accent man, why? And fucking swearing and blaring at you. It's a book that but like back to that original point. I think obviously there was the massive BLM movement that was in the midst of lockdown, and there was loads of anti-slavery stuff, and then one of the things that come out of that was the massive like slandering of Winston Churchill. I saw loads of stuff, and you know, and fair play. Like some of the things that he came out with in his early days, and some of his actions were probably not good at like a basic human level. And yes, he did then go on to pretty much save the world from tyranny, and then get booted out of Parliament pretty much the moment he saved the world. And then he got, you know, and he went away and did some other things and so on. But one of the main things that he did is he read and he wrote. He did both. And he wrote a lot of books in his time, and one of the things that Ryan Holiday says in one of his books, I can't remember which one, he talks a lot about Winston Churchill. And one of the things it made me think that combined with the whole slandering of him is that actually
you can imagine how much that man educated himself along the course of his life. Like,
Yeah.
like 30-year-old Winston Churchill was definitely not the same as 60-year-old Winston Churchill. And I mean, it's a really important point, and that's something that like that reading has definitely taught me. Like the me after a book versus the me from before a book is just a little bit different. So then you add 100 books to that, that creates a big void between previous you and current you. And I'm like, yeah, fair enough. He said some shit things, but actually people change, people grow, and society grows. So we probably shouldn't hate on him for the shit things he said. We should probably be a little bit respectful that he's actually had the capacity to educate himself, identify where we were fucking up, and then progress from there onwards.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's like I am, not to get political, but like I'm on the left hand side of the field as opposed to the right.
Yeah.
But the one thing I can't stand is extremes on either side, and I think the extreme lefts are just out for blood the whole time. And firstly, like, let's not just go after someone who has no way of defending themselves or coming out and apologising. And like, let's say let's say there was Twitter back then, he would have been cancelled before he got into Parliament for something he said when he was 30, and even if he changed his opinion completely. And the thing about people is we are fluid, we're not stuck. And a lot of people think we are just stuck as the same person. Like, I'm not the same person I was a year ago, let alone 10 years ago. The whole sort of joy about being human is the fact that you can change, you can educate yourself, your opinions will change, everything will change at some stage. But going after a dead man, the radical left need to take a break, I think.
Yeah, like, I've never spoke about anything political on the podcast, but that's one thing that I definitely think is that, like you said, you can't go after a dead person, especially when, you know, if you can stack up their good deeds versus their bad deeds, you know, it's going to be...
Yeah, I mean, should we lose the war or be a racist? I mean, like, if he's going to be a racist, but he's going to win us the war, do you know what? Whatever. Like, it's terrible that he's a racist, but we don't want to speak German.
Yeah. And it gives that a little bit more perspective of actually, no matter how amazing anybody's single feat can be, they're not going to be perfect. And like,
oh no,
and like we all like, and that's, you know, and that's something that reading taught me. Like, at the end of the day, we're all like idiots at a basic level, just pissing in the wind, trying to figure out our way to get through this crazy old fucking thing called life. And, you know, yes, one day you may save the world from tyranny, but the other day you might make a really fucking stupid comment or do a stupid action in India. I can't remember whatever he did. And like, but then you can look at all people like that. Like Michael Jordan's a great example. Michael Jordan, did you watch the Last Dance documentary on Netflix?
Yeah.
So like, it. So you could very, like, that whole documentary was favoured towards him, but you could still see that actually he was a bit of a fucking shithead, and that like he was really nasty to a lot of people in his immediate vicinity. But then he did that, some of that out of good intent, some of that out of bad intent, and but at the end of the day, he is labelled as an icon. But at like a basic human level, he may have been kind of actually not that nice.
Yeah.
Right, we're going off a massive tangent here. So,
that's right.
How, like, you get through a lot of books. How do you implement them? Like, what's in your head? Like I said to you before, like, one of the big things for me is whatever I read or whatever I listen to and get educated on, I want to implement it in some form or another. Obviously, you've now got this platform to do so, but on a basic level, how do you look at implementing something? Is it something that's important to you, or do you just want to read?
It's not as important as I'd like it to be, but I think I quite like how I am as a person is very just chilled out. Like, if it's going to stick, I always say, if you throw enough shit at a wall, some of it will stick. And I kind of use that with books, as in, like, let's say I've read 5 books on 5 different topics. I could implement everything in those 5 books and my life would be the most sort of like to the T, brilliant. I could be super successful, super like organized, super everything. But I think as humans, we're not designed to be perfect.
Yeah.
So there's something about books, like I'll read a 300-page book and I might only get 2 points from that I'm like, do you know what? I love that. I'm gonna keep that. So let's take A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. It's one of my favourite books on spirituality. I couldn't tell you what he bangs on about most of the book, but there's one sort of part that has always stuck out to me, my favourite page from that book. He talks about these Chinese monks, and they're on their way to the monastery, and they've got about a 5-hour hike. 2 hours into it, they reach this massive like stream, and there's a girl there in a dress, and she doesn't want to get her dress dirty. So one of the monks picks her up, puts her on her shoulder, puts her down on the other side. 2 hours later into the walk, because they're monks, they're not saying much anyway, one of them goes, "Why did you pick up that woman? We're monks, we're not meant to touch women." He's like, "Oh, are you still carrying her? I put her down hours ago." And that for me is just those kind of Zen stories I love, because it can stand out, and I can reel that off to people anytime that I feel that they're holding on to something, and you have the option just to put it down. As hard as that is sometimes, the idea is like you can just drop the problem, step back, look at it from the back of your head as opposed to through your eyes.
Yeah.
And that I'm going to read A New Earth again, because I think like sometimes you just need a bit of a spiritual reboot. But
what's it about? Give me the full 101. Something I've seen loads of people read. I've never picked it up personally.
Yeah, see, here's the thing. Couldn't even tell you. But it's so it leads on from The Power of Now. So The Power of Now is obviously about sort of focusing on the present. And they say there's 100 ways to skin a cat. He's basically gone through all of them in The Power of Now. And like any scenario you can think of where you wouldn't be present, he's put it in the book. A New Earth, I think, is more about like what life would be like if we could all be a little bit more Zen.
Yeah.
And like that you create your own universe, or you are your own universe, as opposed to sort of the universe is happening to you, you're creating it. And not in a like the secret way of like manifestation, like, oh, I hope I get a Ferrari today. Like more of a way of like you are in control of what happens to your life, and whatever happens to you, you get to choose your response to it. You get to choose your attitude.
Yeah.
You can put things down.
You mentioned The Secret there. Have you read The Secret?
No, I won't. I'm refusing to.
My I've got a good friend. Well, he's my business partner as well as a good friend, and he read it like a good few years ago. I think it's probably one of the only books he's read. Yeah. And he fully bought into the whole idea of it, and bless his socks, but that said though, he's probably one of the most successful and happy and amazing people I know. But like so many people have read that and just took it the completely wrong way, and I think I've read about a third of it and gave up, and just was like, no, this is a lot of bollocks. And that's part of, and that's one thing I found with reading as well, is that you've got life, and this is getting a real big high level conversation now. You've got life, and you've got all these different little pockets of things that you need to learn about, like how to be a bit more Zen, how to be a bit more proactive, how to be a bit more like attention, how to be a bit more physically healthy, how to be a bit more mentally healthy. And what I find very much, like I find it myself, is that I'll read a book about mental health, and then for the foreseeable few weeks after that, I'm very all team mental health. And then I read a book about being Zen, and then I'm like super Zen. Then I read a book about productivity, and then I'm super productive. And it's like, fuck, we just need someone to collect all these books, put them all into one big manual, and say, this is how you do life now, piss off. Like I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast Actually, no, it was a guy that I found on the Joe Rogan podcast, but I listened to him on another podcast. Andrew Huberman, his name is. He's a neuroscientist, and he does a very amazing job of taking the brain's information and all the information about the brain, and like giving it you in a consumable way that doesn't blow your socks off. And one of the things he was saying that he gets really worried about is that there's such an emphasis now on mindfulness, that he's getting to the stage where like there's so many pockets of communities across the world, and there's such a massive emphasis on like being Zen and being well and being mentally well and being like super still and calm. And he was like, actually humans aren't designed to be like that. He was like, humans are designed to attack and retreat. And that was his way of explaining it, is that we're on and we're off kind of thing. And he was like, I'm getting really worried because you've got, number one, you've got advancements in technology, and number two, you've got a massive culture now of people trying to slow down and finding new ways to slow down. So with the advancements in technology, you've got things like Deliveroo and Uber Eats, he was saying. So you now have to you don't even have to work. There is no effort process in ascertaining food. And he was like, you'll find that in loads of different areas because of technology. And you combine that with the whole movement of like stillness and so on. He was like Like, it makes me really worried that I think we're going to start to devolve as a species.
Yeah.
Like, we've spent so much time evolving. And I think that's a really important point, whereas, like, you've got this culture and community who are all taking this information, which is about 15% of what our life should look like, and they're taking it as face value, and that's 100%, and that's everything. And that's obviously one of the downsides of reading, where people buy into certain things so much.
You got to put your skeptical hat on whenever you read any book, because the author, it's their life's work, their bias. Like, so like reading deep work, it was all about, right, you need to focus for this, you need to schedule your distractions, you need to schedule that. And I was like, the thing for me is I just don't like doing that. So I was like, not going to implement it.
Yeah.
And I'm very stubborn, which can be good, can be very bad. So if a book's telling me to do something that doesn't quite align with my values, and one thing I'm quite sure on is what my values are, I'm like, do you know what? Fuck this author. Fuck this guy.
Yeah. It made me laugh when I saw an Instagram post you put about Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is I read bits of somewhat, like, I had like a bit of a cool mentor in my life when I used to work at this shitty gym way back when I was like 18, and he was like, and it was like one of those jobs where you could just sit there and do nothing and get away with it. Like, you talk to someone, and then next thing you know, you'd be looking at the website and whatever. And he gave me Rich Dad Poor Dad to read, so when between doing stuff, I was just reading it at work. And I probably read bits and bobs of it. But anyway, back to what I was going to say is, I saw what you wrote about it on your Instagram, and you were like, he was like, you said something about, like, it's all about financial blah blah blah, but that's not for me, so I'm going to carry on doing what I'm doing. And I think that's really important. And it's important hat to be able to wear. Like, back to Siobhan, someone we know, Siobhan, she often says that, I always see her say that on her stories, where she's like, I read this book and actually I don't agree with it. And I think that's a really important thing to say, where people read stuff where, and they're like, oh my god, like, this is 100% like what I want to take on board. And like, another great example of, sorry, I'm bringing you onto the podcast to talk about ducks, and we're just hammering books here. But I've got a client who I'm very close to, who's a therapist. She works at like a decent level. Like, she has clients, and she coaches other therapists as well. And I asked her to read Lost Connections, and just to see what she think. And parts of the book she loved, but from someone who actively works with people, she was like, some of it I don't think it'll be helpful. She was like, on a ground, like, from a preventative, proactive mental health point of view, it might be really good, but from a reactive, someone who's suffering with mental health at that current moment in time, she was like, some of it I don't think will be that helpful.
You can't fix depression, anxiety with a book. That's the thing. Like, there's ways in which you can certainly help yourself, and like, I'm big on trying to, like, get people to read those books. I think it's not only about if they, like, became depressed or if they got anxious. It's about, like, say their mum got depressed, or their sister, or their best mate. It's so that you can know those steps, and like, knowing how to respond when they're talking to you, and to kind of like understand, because when you want to talk to someone, as in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about sort of seeking to understand before you're understood. And I think that is such an important thing in life, is you will have people in your life that are going to suffer with their mental health. It's a fact nowadays. Like, it's something that, whether that's to do with us as a sort of becoming a more attached to technology, whatever the reason is that people's moods are lowering, or people are more open about talking about it, which I think is great. Everyone's going to have someone that's sad. So reading books about sadness and how to get out of it, it's a pretty solid idea.
Yep.
Because you can be that person that they turn to and say, do you know what, thank you, that was actually really helpful. I'm now going to go and see a therapist based on like what you said. And then within 3 months, they'll probably be like, hey, look, I'm a lot better now. And that was down to what you said. I don't think there's any better feeling than being able to help people in that particular way.
Yeah. Like, one core principle I have learned, if I've learned anything in my time, one thing that I've learned is how to make yourself happy try and make other people happy. And as counterintuitive as that seems, if you're gonna, one thing that you can do on a daily basis is gonna make you feel good, it's make other people feel good, which, you know, like it does sound counterintuitive, but it's one thing I've learned. And fortunate enough for me, like I'm a PT and I'm a coach, so it's pretty much what I get paid to do. So that's not a you know, a hard task to fulfill. But books, like you just said, are a really great way to do that. If you can learn a little bit of information and just pass that information on to someone else, like if there's any good fucking reason to read a book, that's probably going to be it.
Yeah. I have to be really careful nowadays when I chat to mates, like if they're sad or whatever, I'm like, do you want me to give you a quote? And I'm like, because I've got 3 here and I've been waiting them up, and I don't want to be that annoying guy that just says, oh, well, Marcus Aurelius says. And lucky my friends are kind of used to it now, but it's one of those things. I feel like now,
you just wheel them
say, throw enough shit at a wall, some will stick, some sticks, and I've pretty much got a quote for every situation.
My mother had some challenges, as everybody did during the lockdown period. And what did I say to her now? I said something like, don't make permanent decisions on temporary feelings. And I don't know where I got it from. It's definitely from a book or from a podcast or something. And I wheel that off.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, and that's something that I've really had to kind of like, all right, cool, just trust that you're going to be a little bit calmer head tomorrow and then make a decision then. And I said that to her, and she told everybody. She was like, oh, Connor, this is a really amazing thing, and you gave me this amazing bit of advice. And then everyone was like, wow, that's really smart. And I was like, that's not me. I definitely got it from a book or from somewhere like that. So let's discuss some books. Like, you know, there's some that have really personally impacted me, and I want to get your insight into them. And let's just break them down. Any key points that you've got. So one of the ones that you mentioned that you started on was Mark Manson. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which is a bit of a clickbait title, I think, personally.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
it does. That's like, you know, he's obviously got a really good marketing department with the Bright Orange book and that title. So for you, like, what was the big thing with that book? You said it was the one that you got you into reading. So
I think the main thing for me was the value-driven life, and he talks about the guy I think it's in Vietnam, the Japanese guy who's he stays in, I think it's Yokoosha. I'm going to butcher the name, so we'll just pretend that I don't know it.
Yeah.
And probably not pretending, actually. He talks about living a value-driven life. So this guy was stuck in the woods in the forest for like 20-odd years, 30 years maybe, and the war had been over for years, and he kept killing people, and he kept doing it. And yeah, like, granted, probably shouldn't be killing people. It's not great. But in his mind, he was doing it for the greater good. He was doing it for Japan. He was doing it for his country, and he was living by his values. And you couldn't shake that from him. I think when you work out and do some deep work and work out what your values are, and you start living a value-driven life, anxiety's kind of alleviated around how you're behaving, and you just get a more sort of solid picture of who you are when you understand what your values are.
Yeah, what I think with regards to that, and by all means, correct me if you think I'm wrong, is that I think everybody has values, and I think, but people obviously like me and you, we understand at like a base level what our values are, and like we can kind of have a good idea of what they are. Sometimes we have values that we don't even know about, but ultimately values are just kind of beliefs that we have that drive actions and behaviours throughout our day. Loads and loads of people have values that they don't even understand what the concept of values are, and ultimately that drives their actions and behaviours. And I think that was one of the things that I kind of took away, but was like, oh, are you right in saying that? Where I was like, actually, everybody does have behaviours. Sometimes they're just a bit shit. And that, which is why, like, some people will act a certain way in your day and you get pissed off about it. And I'm like, actually, they're just acting on, centering around their values, which is why they've acted in that way. But yeah.
Like, because I used to work in sales before I got super depressed and quit my job. And I was reading 7 Habits, and I was talking about it with one of the managers there, and we were talking about sort of leading like a value-driven life, because I was just basically talking about books to him. Yeah. And he was like, so what are your values then? And it's a question that for years and years, just it generates just a tight feeling in my chest. I hate opening up to people about what my values are. And I was talking to him, and he was like, oh, well, family values are like really important to me. And he was like, oh, cool. When was the last time you like took your parents out or like went and spent a day with them? And I was like, never. And I was earning the right money at the time. I was like, I could literally take them out the weekend, treat them.
Yeah.
And he was like, you got to look deeper into your values, as opposed to just saying what you think people want to hear. Like, what are your actual values? So for me, like, I was thinking about family, and I love my family, but it's not one of my core values, into the sense that, like, I aim to do stuff with them all the time or anything like that. My values are more centered around sort of independence and like curiosity, because I'm quite an introvert, and I really, really enjoy my own company. And it's not something I'd really come to terms with until maybe like the last couple of years, when I was like, actually, I really like being on my own. And like I have, like, I love my friends, but if I don't see my friends for a few weeks, I'm actually fine. So like saying like, oh, friendly values are sort of quite high up on the list, they're actually not for me. But like the whole curiosity, I quite like getting to know new people, but not in a group setting, which makes it quite difficult. Because I don't get my energy from big groups. Mine's like from one-to-one conversations like this. That's where I can thrive in a situation like that. I just have to forget about the however many 100 people are going to listen to it.
100%. Like, I think where my head went when you were saying that is that, like, values is one of those things where, like, at face value, like, it's okay. What do you value? Like, what do you value? That's what it is at a really face level. But then you've also got to take into account all the, like, the things that have happened to you as you've been growing up. So like what you said to me there is like, one thing that I know from growing up, I never thrived in group environments. But one of my values, what I would say is at a face value, one of my values is social environments. So like, actually, how do those two things collide? So like you just said, me personally, I don't thrive in big group settings. So I get more energy from one-to-one conversations like this and one-to-one conversations with my friends. I don't thrive off that bigger group environment. And so it's that, like, actually, it's not a simple conversation. It's not as simple as like, okay, what are your values? Let's get going. It's a conversation of like, okay, what are your values? Are there any complications around that? And and we talk about all these different subjects that we learn through books and through whatever. But I think the main point is that they're there. It's an awareness that you have of it, not necessarily the answer to the question. And it's probably like an ongoing conversation that you have to have with yourself every day, every month, every year. And you know, really get to understand.
Got to ask the why question every now and then. And maybe once a month you just check in with yourself, check what your actions are, and ask that question. Why did I do that? Why is that? Let's say for me, like, I learned to say no, which is weird to say that as an adult. I think I learned to say no over the last year. And say someone was like, oh, mate, do you want to come here for my birthday? There's 12 of us going. I'm like, well, I actually really don't want to go, but I'd love to go for a pint and have some chicken wings with you on Monday. And then I think as opposed to just saying no, you provide an alternative that fits within your values. And obviously there's times where you have to bite the bullet, suck it up, and do things you don't want to do, because otherwise everyone's just going to think you're a wanker. But it's nice to know what your values are and understand why, when someone asks you to do something that you don't want to do, why that feeling comes up of like, oh no, am I about to agree to doing something I don't want to do?
Yeah. I think one of the things you said that is about asking yourself why. Have you ever read Start With Why by Simon Sinek?
Nah.
Haven't you? Oh.
I saw it. It was business focused. I had it, and I saw it was about business, and I just quit my job, and I didn't want to think about anything to do with business at all. And I probably should have read it then.
Yeah.
But I gave it to a friend, and he read it and said it was one of the best books he's ever read.
For me personally, it's probably the most impactful, not the best, but the most impactful book I've read. There's so many like, you know, he's an intelligent bloke. He's incredibly idealistic and optimistic. Like he really thrives for a better world. And you know, like I said before, I listened to the audio version. So for me, like hearing his voice and his passion behind it was a big reason why I found it was so good. Yeah. But if you're going to read any of his books that you want to have a non-business impact off, it's Leaders Eat Last. I think it is Leaders Eat Last. Yeah. And he did another one recently called The Infinite Game. That's very businessy. So I think if anybody's listening to this and they want to read one of his books, it's phenomenal, and it really helps you understand human behavior at a really basic level. And if you're someone who's struggling in the work environment, especially, this is a good book for you to read to then go into your work environment with a different perspective and be able to provide different solutions to problems that people are facing. Lost Connections.
Lost Connections, yeah. So we just touched on that in terms of like what was good about it, and what wasn't so good about it. Well, you know, your friend that's a therapist said. I think for me, Lost Connections was just. He just put it. He writes brilliantly, Johan Hari, and that's never a sentence I thought I was going to say in my life, that someone writes really well. But I read that book and it was just such a. It gives you hope, and that's what it says in the title. It's like a book about what does it say? Why you're depressed and how to find hope. And I was like, oh my god, please tell me. And I read it and I just think like there's a lot about like reconnecting to meaningful work. There's some chapters that are a bit slow. The writing's a bit small. Yeah. But it's written really well and it addresses a really important topic that's close to my heart. But Johan Hari, I've got Chasing the Scream. He's got one on addiction as well. That I'm gonna read because.
So you mentioned quite a few times about your own experiences. Do you mind talking about that? Like what was your experience in mental health?
Yeah, so I essentially just had a terrible story that I told myself that I was just a failure. Yeah. And I think it's something that's actually a lot more common than people think in your sort of mid-20s. I left school and joined the Marines, so I didn't finish sixth form. Cool. Not as cool as you'd think. And I then joined the Marines, kept getting injured. So I had a stress fractured tibia by week 10. I went down to Lympstone, which is where you train, and I had shin splints. So I was pretty much fucked from the off. So week 10, my left shin just decided to break under stress. So I had to have a bit of rehab then, and then went back into a troop. Did another 3 weeks, was out on the ranges, and we were just being told to run up and down this hill, and my Achilles just went. So it wasn't a full rupture. It was like a semi-rupture. Yeah. And I've got a lump there now, which I have no idea what it is. I never got it properly scanned or anything because I was just like, I've got that terrible toxic military mindset of like, carry on, keep going, even if you're broken. And I was very broken. They wouldn't even let me leave to go and like ice it or anything like that. So I had to do a week at the ranges of every time I stepped, my foot was just popping, which is nasty. Anyway, to cut that long story short, I then went back into training. I then rolled my ankle about 18 times on one of the last exercises that you go on. Cried for about 3 miles. And from that point, went into rehab for my ankle. As that was getting better, my knee buggered up. I had calcific patellar tendinopathy, which is a mouthful. And it's just a dull ache. And I was on all the drugs that they could give me, like naproxen, codeine. It was pretty heavy. And I then left after about 18 months of just constant injuries, and left there, went back into work, worked selling cars, hated it, hated being told what to do by someone that I didn't like have to do what they're told, because I think coming from the military I had a bit of a complex about authority. And then went to college, was going to go to uni, didn't go there, another failure as it were, and then went and started working in the call centre, and I was like, it's not enough for me. It wasn't meaningful enough for me. I didn't care about what I was selling. I didn't believe in it, and I did that for 3 years, and it just got to a stage where I just started feeling really anxious. I was just really depressed. I had like panic attacks in like big like floor meetings, and I was like, I need to do something drastic here and change. So I just quit that job, and then was going to move to Australia, and obviously did for a few months, and then came back.
So when was that? Was that only a couple of years ago then?
Oh yeah, that was last year. I left that job.
So
I left in October, not even a whole year ago. So October,
and then
when I quit.
When was it that you started reading?
I'd been reading probably from like the start of last year, start of 2019. A few audiobooks.
So those two things massively coincided.
Yeah, they came to me at the right time.
So that's where it's funny actually. Like one of the main topics in that Start With Why book was like people who were unhappy in the workplace and finding your why and finding your purpose and your passion, which allows you to be more engaged and happy with what you do. And he talked a lot about that in mental health. So Obstacle is the Way. Yeah, hit me.
It's a great book, and I've actually just ordered it again because I give my books away. So a lot of them, I'm stopping doing that now because I've realised the power of revisiting things and getting to the pages that I've marked and stuff. But Obstacle of the Way for me is just about that mindset shift of the world is happening to you, or you're sort of creating the world. So something shit happens, let's say, for example, I was meant to be flying to Bali on the 11th of September.
Yeah.
They've now said that they're not opening. I was going to be there for God knows how long, 6 months, a year, whatever. I hadn't really got a plan.
Yeah.
Bali are going to stay shut, apparently, according to their lovely government members, which I'm sure is great for like the safety of the country. But I was like, oh, right, another challenge in my way. I was like, right, so what can I do here? And you can't see it, but on my mirror, I just put start now, because I'd coupled a lot of ideas of things that I was going to start with being in Bali.
Yeah.
And then I was like, how backwards is that? I'm waiting to go somewhere to do something. And I think sometimes you need adversity to give you that kick up the arse. And like when something is in your way, you become more inventive, you become more creative. Like they say, when life gives you lemons, sort of like make lemonade.
Yeah.
But I think that, let's take, for example, starting the podcast. Chucked out of a country that I love, couldn't go back in, all my stuff's in a flat there. I'm like, right, well, I can either just sit around the UK and mope until I can go back to Australia, or I can make something out of this and use this as fuel to get on with it.
Yeah.
And not in that like blind faith, like, oh, I've got the energy, I'm going to burn it up and do all this stuff. More just like, if something's in your way, you know, that can't go around it, can't go over it, can't go through it, like, you find a way.
Yeah.
And it's an important thing to do, is to not be put off by adversity or a challenge.
Yeah, so like the whole premise of the book, isn't it, is when you get a challenge, you tackle it head on, you face it head on, and you plow through it. Like, it's interesting. One of the main things that have been like a pinnacle in my kind of adult life was when I was in Australia. I lived in Australia for 3 years, lived in Sydney, and it's one of them, with pre-Australia, self-employed. I've never really properly worked for anyone. I've always been hyper independent, hyper proactive and productive on my own. Never really needed that person to give me a kick up the arse. Now, as you know, when you go to Australia, you have to work for someone. It's not as simple as just turning up and launching into a self-employed environment. You haven't got the support structures around you, and ultimately you need a visa if you want to stay there for the long run, which I did. So I went through 3 jobs, all different fitness jobs, and every single one of them, I just faced the same problems. And I was like, the first job, I got messed around with working hours, and I got messed around financially. Second job, I was promised the earth. Then about halfway through, they completely retracted what they promised me, and that then turned into financial problems. And then the third job was probably the better of the 3. However, then there was like, because I was the English person and wasn't the Australian person, I wasn't respected, and like there was that level of kind of constant banter that was there, which you kind of like, you roll your eyes at because you're English and they're Australian, you're hardly any different. But at the end of the day,
they've got no chat anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what I've always said. I always said that Australian females were way better than the Australian males, because all the Australian males, they were like the females in England, where there was just constant nattiness and bitchiness, and it was like, and like, so I had loads of Australian female mates and then loads of English male mates when I was over there. But anyway, like what came of that obstacle and that adversity, it was that, okay, all these ideas that I've had in my head and all these ideas that I've written down over the years, that was enough of an obstacle and enough adversity for me. And like obviously what happened with you, and you mentioned with the call center and stuff, like it kind of got to that level for me where I was getting up in the morning, didn't want to go to work. I was coming home, I was just sitting on the sofa, and I at the time I probably wouldn't have qualified myself as having any mental health issues or feeling anxious, depressed. But upon reflection, like I very much went within myself. I didn't want to participate in social occasions and so on and so forth. And then so couple of things happened, and I had to come home ultimately. And and like the coming home back to the UK process was pretty, it was experiences, like a couple of things different things happened at the same time.
Isn't it, mate?
Yeah, and like
it's tough being told no when you've got plans.
Yeah, and like at the time I had a girlfriend, and we broke up so that I could come home, and I just come home for Christmas, and then got landed back in Sydney in the January, to be told that I had to be out of the country by like the 2nd of Feb. So I just wasted like 3k going home for Christmas. Anyway, what has now come out of that 18 months later, all the different ideas and the little things that I picked up from the Australian fitness industry is now turned into my business, which is Collective Fitness. And we are coming to the pinnacle of that now at this current moment in time in behind the scenes. So the point I'm getting to is that you need that certain level of adversity, and you need that certain level of dissatisfaction to motivate you enough to get to certain points within your life. A book that I read recently, Who Moved the Cheese. Have you read that? Yeah, it's a little mini book, and
I was so confused when I got it. I had no idea what I was getting. I saw this tiny book. I was like, "What?" And then I was like, "All this writing so big. They're tiny paragraphs."
Yeah,
and it's great.
And the main thing that comes out of that, there's so many little lessons in that book, but it's in a way like a mini obstacle is the way, and what it says is that you need to embrace change in life and ultimately be able to take what's given to you and make something of that. But ultimately, if you don't embrace adversity and embrace obstacles, you're never going to get to that point of like success. And you look at anybody successful in the world, they will have been through obstacles, but for some reason in modern society we're just taught that if you get a challenge, run away from it. It's like this really backwards mentality that and you look through what we've been through as a species, and like I was talking about before, how like we seem to be kind of like devolving, and it's one of the main things that I see is that anybody who gets when life gives you lemons, like when people give lemons, they just throw the lemons in the bin. They don't make lemonade.
So I don't like them. I don't like these.
Yeah, there's just so many ways you can take that conversation, but ultimately, we need to embrace the obstacles that we face. Final one, Art of Resilience.
Oh, the Ross Edgley book, loved it. So I picked that book up earlier because I was flicking through it because I'm going to do a post on it later about the sort of quotes in there.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was such an interesting book because, firstly, I like swimming, but I'm actually terrified of the water.
Yeah.
And it's all in my head, and I just think about sharks, and I think about snakes, and I think about crocodiles that aren't ever going to be there. I went for a lake swim the other day. I had to get out after 800 metres because I was looking, I couldn't see more than a foot in front of me.
Yeah.
I didn't know how deep the lake was, even though I probably could have just like swam down and touched the bottom. And I kept thinking about that really shit film that J-Lo's in. It's like Anaconda. And I kept thinking about it, and I actually had to get out because I was like, I literally can't stay in this water because I know it's coming. and it's so bizarre. So I have so much respect for Ross Edgley because he swam, like when he was swimming in between north of Cornwall and the Bristol Channel, he was accompanied by a basking shark. Yeah. And things I know the basking sharks would never attack a human. If I saw one, I would shit my pants. But in a really perverse way, I really like that fear. So like, I really want to go shark cage diving because I just want to do it. I've done like crocodile cage diving before in Zimbabwe, and I just like that fear in a really weird way. And I think I probably get off on it a little bit. It's so strange, but I have so much respect for the fact that he swam all that way, couldn't see anything the whole time, just literally every day. Didn't even ask himself the question of, "Are you ready for it today?" He just got it done, and I have so much respect for people like that because I've had that attitude, and he hasn't had that put into him. He works quite closely with the military. Yeah. Whereas my mindset is like, I'll get on with whatever needs to be done when I know that it needs to be done. But I learnt that.
I think so for anyone who's listening who hasn't read the book, it's about Ross Edgley. I think it's in 2018 he did it, where he got on a boat in where did he get on the boat? Well, it was
Margate.
That was it. And then didn't get off it again until he swam all the way around the UK back to Margate. So he didn't set foot on land the whole way, and it took him about 5 months, did it? It took him about 5 months.
Yeah, I think it was 157 days, 17,000 and something miles. Yeah. No, 1,700 miles, sorry.
And like his whole initial where it got really interesting for me is his whole initial concept behind the book. It was like, okay, everybody said to him before, this is not a test of the body. Like, this will become a certain point where it'll be horrible, you'll adapt, and you'll just get on with it, and it'll become your normal day. Like, your body will adapt to it because that's what the body's amazing at. But your mind is what will break. And then so he went through all this rigmarole of kind of like trying to train his mind and putting for himself through these like 48-hour swims before he got on the boat.
Yeah. 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 Mm. Yeah. 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 They say it's normal to act abnormally in abnormal circumstance. I don't know where it's from. It is from a book though. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yep. Yeah. Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. 1984. George Orwell. The Alchemist. uh, God. Now 110, maybe more. Non-fiction. The Alchemist. So the Alchemist is not non-fiction. It's a novel. It's by a guy called Paulo Coelho, and it follows like a Spanish shepherd boy in God knows what time it was, and his adventure. He was presented in this dream the idea of like there was this gold in the pyramids, and an alchemist is someone that essentially turns like iron ore into iron, a metal smith or something like that. But it's just a really nice story, and it goes through a lot of like issues that I think a lot of people face. So, what do people do for love? What do people do with their dreams? What do people do when they stray from their dreams? Like the importance of travel, the importance of like taking note of the signs that the world is giving you. And it just spoke to me on like such a deep level, and it was the thing that actually made me sort of go to Australia. It was the one book I was like, do you know what, like I don't actually have like a dream or a goal or whatever it is, but it's fine to just kind of go in a little bit blind and just take yourself wherever your attention is then demanded, and be okay if that's off the path that you think you should be on. Mm. 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 Yeah, you can take a lot from fiction books, I think, because if you think about it, the author has got a message that they want to get out there, and they're just telling it in a story because they may not be a scientist, or they might not have a particular field that they're well versed in enough to write like an academic paper, which is essentially what most non-fiction books are. But they've still got great ideas, and they can still get them out there, and they're just wrapping it up in a story. And I think it's a great thing. I read fiction before I go to sleep because it's one of those, like I can just kind of switch off, and it saves me watching South Park all night. I'd say my perspective and my attitude towards other people's perspective. I think compassion is a big thing that is sort of growing within me. My attitude towards adversity, stuff like that. I think it's always something that I had quite a good attitude towards it, but now it's more of a lighter take on it, as opposed to before I was like, from the military, mate, I'm going to go and attack it. Whereas now I'm like, right, let's just assess it and let's see what it is. And I think spiritually, I've got right into sort of meditating and stuff like that, and it's all come from books, which has all come from podcasts. So yeah, I think they're the sort of main things. Um, right. going on my phone in the morning time. That was a big thing. I think when I read Essentialism, it's like what things are serving you, what's not serving you. And I think when you start asking those questions, like, you don't need to live a life where everything serves you and that everything's a mean to an end. But I think you do kind of have to work out what's really holding you back. And if you're spending like half an hour on your phone in the morning, it's dreadful. It's not good for your brain. Mm. 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 Love that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, here it comes. I love it when people start getting on board with the ideas when you don't tell them and then they get it. I'm like, yeah, well, told you so. Mm. I think for me, where my brain is quite active and quite creative, it doesn't help me with things like anxiety and stuff like that. My biggest thing that I have to remember every day is that your thoughts just aren't real. And whatever you think someone's thinking, they're probably not. You should never be you can never be a mind reader with current scientific advancements. That may be coming, but right now you can't read minds and you can't tell the future. So that's the one thing I'd say that I have to remember every day. I'm like, yeah, not a mind reader, and I definitely can't tell the future. Yeah, it was a really good chat, mate. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, perfect. Well, however you're listening, if that's Spotify or Apple, it's just a need to read. That is with the word two and not the number. But on Instagram, it's at a need to read with the number two as opposed to the word. And you'll see, if you follow the Instagram, you'll see on there, I'll be pestering everyone whenever I've got a new episode up. But yeah, if you're on the fence about reading, give us a listen and see if I can twist your arm.